I was raised and educated in British Columbia, a beautiful place, but Christians are really hard to find there. I didn't get to meet a Christian, to have any spiritual conversation with one, until I was 27 years of age. But I began a serious study in astronomy when I was 7. My parents say I was born being a scientist. I started doing experiments since the time I was 2. And at age 7, I wanted to know why the stars were hot. And they said, go to the library. So that's exactly what I did. And ever since the age of 7, I've been fascinated by the galaxies and stars that make up the universe. And at age 8 is when I recognized that astrophysics would be my future career. And from the time I was 8 forward, I would spend a year studying in depth a subdiscipline of astronomy. So one year I looked at stellar atmospheres, another year at the physics of the stellar interiors. And when I was 16 is when there was a big debate. Does the universe arise from some kind of a steady state? Is it a hesitating universe model? Is it like what the Hindus teach, where you got a reincarnating universe? Or is it Big Bang? Well, at age 16, I recognized that the evidence already was overwhelmingly favor the Big Bang theory over all the alternate explanations for the universe. And I knew if it was Big Bang, the universe had to have a beginning. And if there was a beginning, there had to be a beginner. So from age 16 onwards, I did not doubt the existence of God. My astronomy proved to me there had to be some kind of God behind the universe. But being born and raised and educated in Canada, I was taught the scientific method in grade 1. So by the time I was 16, I was thoroughly steeped in the scientific method. And when I recognized that there had to be a God to explain the universe, I began to put to the test the different philosophical systems and religions of the world. I began with Descartes and Immanuel Kant, read what they had to say about the universe, and recognized that what they had to say was incorrect. Immanuel Kant, for example, made the claim that God exists, but that God creates within space and time that eternally exists. And when I was, in my teenage years, is when physicists were demonstrating that time and space don't exist until the universe is created. So I put aside those philosophers, and I began to go through the world's holy books one at a time. And I went through the Hindu Vedas, and that's the religious textbook that teaches that the universe has multiple beginnings. So the universe has a beginning, it ends, it restarts, it ends, and it restarts. And at age 16, I realized that the universe had an entropy measure that was at least 100 million times too high to make it possible for the universe to have any rebounding or restarting mechanism. So I put Hinduism aside. Now, the high school I was going to was 80% Asian in Vancouver, British Columbia. We had a lot of Buddhists in that school, and they encouraged me to look at their commentaries. But as I looked at the Buddhist commentaries, I realized they basically taught the same thing about the universe that the Hindu Vedas did. So I put that aside. And we had a couple of Muslims. I looked at the Quran, and as I read through the Quran, recognized that it had creation texts, but they contradicted one another. And one in particular said that the planets are more distant than the stars. And even with the naked eye, you can tell that that's not true. The stars are far more distant than the planets. And I also figured it had to be written by a man, because it said the gestation period for the woman was 6 months rather than 9 months. So I put that aside, and we had one student in our high school who was of the Baha'i faith. And, as I was talking to him, he said, well, what we do in Baha'i is we take the kernels of truth out of all the world's religions and put them together into a consistent package. So I says, great, show me what you got. And a week later, I went back to him and said, well, from what I can tell, what you and Baha'i have done is to take the great errors of the world's religions and put them together into an inconsistent package. And he wound up leaving the Baha'i faith. Now, when I told you earlier, I didn't meet Christians until I was 27 years of age. That was to get close enough to a Christian where I could have some kind of spiritual conversation. But at age 11, I did get to see two Christians from about 30 feet away. These were two businessmen that came into our public school, put 2 boxes on our teacher's desk, and left without saying a single word. But in those boxes were Gideon Bibles. And our teacher invited us to come forward and take one if we wanted one. And every one of us took one. And I still carry that Gideon Bible around with me that I got at age 11. And it stayed on my bookshelf untouched, unread for 6 years. Not until I was 17, after I'd been exposed to the cosmology, looked at the great philosophers, and went through these other holy books, I finally picked this up. And you say, why did you leave it to the end? I knew it would be the greatest challenge. And one principle you learn in science is this: always tackle the easy problems first and then the most difficult at the end. And so I began to go through this book. And the first thing I noticed is how differently it was written. It was clear, it was direct, it was not repetitious. I mean, if you look at the Vedas, for example, or the Quran, highly repetitious, very vague language, and full of a lot of esoteric kind of talk. And I said, that's the way you write if you're trying to impress somebody. And I said, that's what a human being would do. When I picked up this book, there was none of this esoteric poetry. None of this appeal to intellectual snobbery. It was clear, direct, giving names, dates, places, full of geography, history, and science. And I said, this I can put to the tests. Now, this is the only book I picked up that actually commanded objective testing. 4 times in the Bible, we're told to put everything to the test. Here's one example from the New Testament. Test everything, hold on to the good. Now, what particularly impressed me about the Bible, not only did it command objective testing, it showed me step by step how to put everything to the test.